Hey everybody, I'm Jamie Thingelstad. Welcome to Running a Virtual Server with Confidence. I was explaining to some of my friends this session and they said, wow, you really didn't do a good job of naming that session. This sounds kind of boring and lame, and with confidence, it's like, well, kick ass while running a virtual server would be a better description or something like that. I do want to clarify one thing. This is about being a customer of a virtual server, so like using like a Linode or a Slicehost or something like that, not about deploying VMware. So if you're thinking that you're going to hear about running VMware ESX and deploying 100 virtual servers for your data center, not this talk. So this talk is about, I'm going to go to Linode and I want to run a website, and I'm sick of Bluehost because they suck, and I want to do it the right way. So that's this talk. If you want to leave, feel free. The genesis of this talk is really just a crap load of work that I did about a year ago after I had one of my boxes compromised at Slicehost. Compromised because I let my cousin run a blog on it and he installed a WordPress plugin, and bad things happened, as they can happen sometimes. And so I had to do it completely from scratch. And it was the fourth time I did it from scratch, so I decided two things. One, I was going to do it right. I was like, all right, I'm sick of the just kind of hacking this as fast as I can. I'm going to do it right. And two, I want to make sure that that it is secure, because I don't want to have ads appearing in HTML files on my web server, and I don't want to I just don't want to see that ever happen again. So I decided to document the entire process. So rather than there being slides for this, we're going to walk through this wiki page, which is on my wiki. You can see the URL up there. Feel free to go there. You can get there, and you could follow these directions yourself to do this yourself. The main thing that I want you to leave here today with is a good understanding of kind of the how. If I'm going to do this, how do I do it? Even if you're currently running your own VPS, I'm guessing you're probably going to hear a package or two that you would think like, oh, I should be running that on my server too. And I'll also cover off what I consider is a significantly more advanced web server infrastructure than your typical Apache mod PHP kind of setup. So just as a little background, I'm a CTO for a local startup. I'm a hardcore kind of geek. I'm not so much a coder, but I'm more like a deployer, and I love to like hack on things and remix them in various interesting ways. It drives me nuts if you were to go to my personal blog and it took a second to load, because I think that makes me look dumb, and I want you to have a good web experience. So I care about running these things the right way. So that's what we're going to cover. Make sense? All right. How many people here currently run their own website on their own VPS? Okay. How many use like either Slicehost or Linode? Okay. How many are Slicehost customers that are moving? Yeah. Yeah, I was not happy that Slicehost got bought by Rackspace. So that's why I moved to Linode. Linode's really fast, by the way. And how many people here use shared hosting? Like a DreamHost or Bluehost or something like that. Okay. Everybody that didn't raise their hand is considering this? Yeah? All right. So I will say, I didn't necessarily plan on going through this, but I will just maybe spend a minute on it. It is more expensive to run your own VPS. You're not going to find a $7 VPS. If you do, you're being lied to. If you find a $15 VPS, you're being lied to. Those companies are oversubscribing their hosts. So probably your best price is around a $30 price point to get your own VPS. I actually pay, I think, $45 at Linode because I want a gig of memory. And memory will be your most important metric for price because it's the one thing that can't oversubscribe. So you can only, if you only have this much memory, that's all you can sell. I use Linode. Like I said, I really like it, but you could use whatever you want. I don't think there's necessarily any horrible ones or good ones. There are some things I would look for. I'd look for VPS providers that give you the ability to communicate with it out of band. So like if the kernel dies, you want to be able to get in there and execute a restart, or if something very bad happens. So like Linode, you can use lish to SSH in and then actually communicate at a fairly low level. That's not something like, if you're not that technical, you're never going to do that, but maybe if you get in a really bad spot, you might have somebody who could help and get your stuff back up and running. And if you care at all, pay the money to get a snapshot backup. So, I mean, it's always an incremental fee, but not doing it is just really painful when you do need to use that. And you can sleep well knowing that if somebody did do something horrible to your website and defame it, that you can just say, no, restore from last night, and whatever, you're back. So, yeah.
How far back would you slide?
Most of the services support three things. They support a daily, a weekly, and then a manual. And so what I do is I do a manual on significant upgrades. I do a weekly, and the daily are just totally automatic, and I hope to never use them. So first I'll go through setup. So there's just a little bit I want to talk about here before we get to packages. This is everything that I've documented here is with Ubuntu 10.04 LTS. And I chose that. It's old, but it is long-term support, but you could use whatever you want to use. There might be some small differences. But one of the first things that I would do is, first you set your machine up, get SSH set up, and you get your user account set up. And then I go through, one second here, I want to make sure that I have the right, yes, okay. So after I create my username, you set your host. And this is all fairly standard stuff you're going to do with any Unix box, and stuff you never have to do with a shared host, of course, but you do if you're running your own machine. If you really want to be cool, find a hosting provider that supports IPv6. Linode does in some of their data centers, but not all. But all of my websites are actually IPv6 reachable. And interestingly enough, from my logs, I can tell about 5% of traffic actually is connecting IPv6. But at least you're ready and you can have major street cred. So then set your time zone, set your get updates. And so at that point, you've got a box that's pretty reasonably set up. Okay. One of the things that I think you should look for with a VPS provider, by the way, is somebody who allows for more than just kind of a default disk configuration. One of the things that I like that Linode does, you could do this in like EC2 as well, but it's way more complicated. You can actually create different block devices and attach them separately. So one of the things that I do is I actually create another partition for serve www, and then that's not the same partition as my slash partition. That way, all my logs from Nginx, for example, go into slash serve www slash site name slash logs, and that way I can just make sure that even if my website's filled up the drive, I'm not going to fill up the root partition. Filling up the root partition is bad, so you don't want that to happen. And then after that, I do a reboot just to make sure that the box is happy. So you could literally follow these directions if you're using Linode and get that stuff set up pretty easily. The first thing I do after that is, some people don't think you need to do this. I don't know why you want. I always move SSH off of port 22. If you're running your own VPS, there are robots out there that are going to be knocking on SSH constantly, and you can do all sorts of things to stop that, but I just get out of the way. So if you move your SSH endpoint to port 22,000 or whatever number you want to pick, it's just going to be there's much less noise. And when I run on that, nobody ever hits my SSH endpoint except for me. Nobody's randomly scanning at high-end ports. So this is the code that you do to use to do that. Move your port up, and then restart SSH. Note this. Do make sure you can connect before you disconnect, or you're going to be figuring out how do you do out-of-band communication with your server very quickly, or you're going to be starting over. And so part of what I said is I wanted to make sure that you can deploy a server that you feel confident in. So one of the things that I do right at that point is I install Nmap. Mmap is a tool that scans your network and reports on things that are open. Scan your host, and you make sure that it has no ports that you would not expect to be open. So at this point, the only port that should be open is 22,000. Of course, Nmap doesn't know what that is, because that's not the standard port for SSH, but that's exactly how my host should look at this point. So that's good, right? Ready to go. Is everybody following along? Making sense? Okay. So the next step, and at this point, like I don't want to make it sound like I'm nuts and I got a tinfoil hat on, but you really do have to think about time, okay? You don't want to do the first part of this and not make it through all the security stuff until the next week. Because in that week, you don't know what happened. So when you're deploying your own VPS, I strongly recommend that all of the security stuff be done at the same time in the same session. Do not let time pass. So at this point, we've got SSH moved. We're happy. We're on 22,000. We're not getting script kiddies hitting us. So before we open anything else up, we need to install IP tables, because we're not going to let anything else advertise itself until IP table says it's okay. IP tables is just a host-based firewall. It's going to sit on your network stack and make sure that anything coming in or out is okay and it's part of your rules. It's as simple as doing an apt-get install of IP tables. By default, when it first runs, there's no rules. And your rules can both be in and out rules. And this is the literal config that I run. So you could grab this and shove it in there. Basically what it's doing is it's saying that outbound traffic's okay as long as it's sustained. You could get much more paranoid than I am on this. Like, I mean, it's not a bad idea to say that if somebody tried to IRC from your box, that shouldn't be allowed. I can tell you that's how most scripts that will make your box into a zombie will do that. They will install a daemon that will then use either TFTP or IRC to communicate out and then report back to home. And then they allow themselves to be remote controlled. If that sounds crazy, it's because people buy these things. So that's what, you know, nobody cares about you. You know, like if you're thinking like, oh, I'm not a target, I don't need to worry about this, that's the wrong way to think. What people care about is you have a server that they can use. They could care less who you are. And actually, they don't want to take your box down. They want to infect it in a way that you have no idea that you're infected so that they can continue to use you in their bot army to send spammy emails and do all this other stupid stuff. So, like, sometimes when I talk to people about this, they're like, oh, I don't need to worry about that. Nobody cares about my stuff. It's like, no. Nobody cares about your stuff. That's true. But that doesn't mean you're not a target. You're a target because you exist. Then you don't need to do anything else other than exist. Maybe if you had a crappy internet connection, they wouldn't care, right? Because you couldn't send that much email. But the reality is if you have a nice, fast VPS, they want you. So we're locked down. We're only allowing stuff incoming on port 22,000. We're only allowing incoming on port 80, and we're allowing incoming on port HTTPS. And I am responding to pings because while you could argue that you shouldn't do that, I think you should. You're be a good internet citizen. The next two things that we install, so now we're nice and locked down. Now we want to get serious about being mean to people that are mean to us. So there's a great package called Fail2Ban. Anybody ever use it? Okay, so Fail2Ban is a very cool piece of software. The link here walks through the Linode setup on Fail2Ban. Fail2Ban essentially will watch log files, will parse those log files for behavior, and then will take action against that behavior. So what I use this for is if you try to log into my WordPress site and you provide the wrong username and password 5 times, you will no longer be able to ping my box. So you are gone. Like you have shown to me that you are an aggressor and I don't ever want to see you again. If you try to access the MySQL web administration thing, which I don't run, PHP MyAdmin or whatever, I don't have that installed. There's no reason you should ever request that URL. You are not banned. You are probing my box, right? So you should be banned. Fail to ban will come with a bunch of default rules that are reasonably okay. It looks at things like Apache bad bots, which look at signatures of various things, and bans them. So out of the box, it's cool. This is, by the way, the tool that most people say, like, oh, you don't need to move SSH to port 22,000, because just look at this. And if you're getting invalid connections to 22, just ban them permanently. Yeah, you could, but you're going to generate like 100 alarms a day, right? So it's like, I'd rather just generate a small number of alarms a day. I can tell you that having failed to ban, I get probably 30, 40 bans a day, and I typically ban servers for a week, and I ban their whole subnet because I just don't trust them. So fail to ban is a great little tool. The other thing that's interesting about fail to ban is it can look at any text file. So like if you're writing your own software, like say you're hanging out in a company, you got an API that you've built, and you're worried about people doing bad things to your API, just write a little log file, set up fail to ban, and if people start probing your API, you ban them, right? Just easy peasy. So it's a really nice piece of software. It can ban you, though, so be careful for that. And there have been a couple of times when I've told my password manager the wrong password for the wrong site, and I'm like, why isn't that working? Why isn't that working? Oh, can't talk. Wait 15 minutes. The other piece of software that you'll want to install, and this is again in that same period of time, is RK-Hunter. RK-Hunter is a great little package. It stands for Rootkit Hunter. It's also a file system monitoring tool. So when you install RK-Hunter, the very first time you run it, you do the install, you run RK-Hunter update, which essentially just goes and gets, it updates all its signatures for various rootkits. And then run a check, so it'll actually scan through your system and make sure you don't have any rootkits. You don't, because you've not logged off of the server and only 25 minutes have passed at this point. But if a week has passed, that may be too late. After you run that, you want Rootkit Hunter to do some interesting stuff. So the first thing you do is you run update properties, and when it inits, it does a bunch of cool things. So like, how many people are familiar with file system monitoring? So it basically just makes sure that stuff that shouldn't be changed hasn't been changed. So Rootkit Hunter will sit there and do a hash on everything in /bin, everything in /userbin. I actually think it's kind of an interesting idea if you configure right to do it on your website and let you know, like, did a new PHP file show up in a directory that wasn't supposed to be there? But RK-Hunter will do that, and then you get great emails like this. So that userbin awk, that was in response to an update that came through Ubuntu. But it's great to see Rootkit Hunter sees like, oh, awk changed. Was awk supposed to change? I can say like, yeah, awk was supposed to change. I did an aptitude update, and it should have changed. And then when that happens, you actually have to manually connect to your box and do an RK-Hunter prop update, which then will re-index the database and say, okay, now it's a known good, and we won't, because it will continue to tell you that those files have been updated. Now, when really bad things happen, Rootkit Hunter will actually tell you things like, Rootkit Hunter has been modified. I have a box that I've been keeping alive because I'm just using it for forensics, but Rootkit Hunter is on that box, and Rootkit Hunter just reports that Rootkit Hunter is not Rootkit Hunter. It says, I don't know what happened to me, but I am not me. And so and every time I fix him, he becomes not him. So there's something on that box that's constantly just killing Rootkit Hunter and attempting to make sure that it's not seen. Rootkit Hunter does generate some false positives on Ubuntu. I don't know if this is true on all releases, but in 10.04 LTS, you'll get a couple of false positives, and you can configure this stuff. It's pretty well documented, but like there's a hidden directory .udev that you got to say like, yeah, that's okay. And then there's these tests that you don't want to run because they will just throw tons of errors. So does that make sense? So if you deploy that, you're confident that your server is safe. All right. If somebody came in and added a file, you're good. If somebody tried to hack it, you're going to get notified. If they threw a bunch of failures, they're going to get banned. Question? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I would run it by default first. I would only disable the test if it's throwing a false alarm. This I found by just Googling, rootkit under Ubuntu and known issues that Ubuntu has with rootkit under. All right, so we've secured the box. Now, in addition to that, I think the next thing after securing is we need to automate it. Because I don't know about you, but I don't get paid by my VPS to be a sysadmin. So I don't want to sit there all day like doing ridiculous stuff to it. I also recognize this is not a commercial service, so I'm okay with things happening in a very automated fashion. And if that breaks something, I'd rather deal with that than having to stay on top of things. In a commercial environment, you don't necessarily want like automated updates happening anytime, but it's fine for this. So another package is Logwatch. Folks use Logwatch? Yeah, that should be on every box you run. Logwatch does exactly what it says. It watches logs. It will send you an email every day telling you what's happening on your server, and it can watch a bunch of different packages. So, like, I can have a watch Nginx, I can have a watch postfix, it can watch Ubuntu updates, and it just gives you a really good sense of confidence. Like, that email every day is a good sense of, like, okay, everything's fine. One of the things it does that's nice is it shows you 404s. So, like, you do actually see in Logwatch, like, oh, look, these hosts are scanning my server. I'm seeing hits to phpMyAdmin and all that kind of business. And it will look at failed to ban and say, like, yep, they were banned. So like, it's a very good it's a very good positive signal that, like, everything is healthy. And I actually run this on pretty much every box I run. There's not much that you have to do other than configure the config file to actually send it as mail output in HTML, and then after that, you're good to go. You should, I think, apply unattended upgrades. I only suggest applying the unattended security upgrades. So you're not going to know, right? I mean, you have no idea when Perl's been hacked or when awk had an issue. So just, install that package, the unattended upgrades package, and you don't have to worry about it. And you'll get a little note in Logwatch saying these packages have been applied. That doesn't mean you never have to apply your own packages, right? You'll still have upgrades, but the security ones will be taken care of. The other ones you'll have to do yourself. And then the third part is Logrotate. And Logrotate just does what it says. It rotates log files for you. So remember I was saying that you put your server logs on serve www. Well, in addition, you want to make sure that those are being managed. So Logrotate does all that for you. Very easy to configure and make sure that you're not going to fill up your partitions with log files, and zips them and does all the right stuff to them. Yep. Yeah. And it supports all kinds of wacky stuff like huffing the process after it does rotation. So you can deal with, how does it deal with open file handles, and all that stuff can all be dealt with, which is really, it's nice. So the next step, so we've secured it, we've automated. Before we start, I haven't gotten to the point of putting web stuff on here because I don't want to put my stuff on here until I have confidence that it's going to be good, because then I'm doing like a lot of work and I don't want to have to redo that. The next step I would suggest, and this is kind of optional, but I would strongly recommend that you look at setting up an automated rsync to another server. Now, if you're picking somebody like, a hosting provider like Linode or like Rackspace, it is highly unlikely that one day you're going to wake up and your VPS is gone. But you could wake up and your VPS is gone. And if that sounds very bad to you, I think you should proactively be planning for that. So what I do, I actually use rsync.net, which is a service that all they do is sell disk space that's available on an rsync server. And then I run a nightly task that rsyncs everything on my VPS to rsync.net. And just because I can, I picked their server in Switzerland, so it's out of U.S. jurisdiction as well. Not doing anything weird, just, you know. There are stories, if you look online, you hear stories of people that had a VPS at a server farm. Company goes out of business. They lock the doors one day. All the machines are shut down. They're sold as assets to alleviate debt. And whatever you had on there is gone, and it will never come back. So, again, not likely to happen, but could happen. And if that would be a very bad thing, it's worth the $7 a month to have, 20 or 10 gig of storage and copy stuff over to it. All right. I'm not going to talk about the build tools and stuff like that. Stuff you cover on your own. So at that point, we've got a happy server. It's being backed up. Now we've got confidence. So now the last part of confidence to deal with. Let me make sure I know what time. When is our session over? It's 30 after, right? Or 35. We have 20 minutes. Okay. The last part of confidence is confidence of scaling. So it's surprising how unscalable most of your basic kind of WordPress sites are. If you're running PHP with mod PHP on Apache, if you tweeted a link to your site and 20 people clicked on it at the same time, you're probably going to give a negative experience to a number of them. 20 is not that big of a number. And particularly if this is your small business or if you just kind of personally care about that stuff, you want to have a lot more scalability than that. Now, I know a lot of people probably know about things like WP Super Cache and there's a W3 Total Cache. Like there's various plugins for things like WordPress and other servers or other apps that you can use for caching. I'm not a huge fan of them. They work, but I find that that's a layer of complexity that I don't want to put in WordPress. I actually think that should be handled on my web server. So when I did this little project and I said, okay, I want the confidence that my server is going to be there all the time and that I can just load a ton of traffic on it, that's a big part of confidence for me. So I decided I was going to kick Apache to the curb and finally really bite the bullet and use Nginx. Nginx is an entirely different web server than Apache. No negative things to Apache. I think Apache is a great project. Mostly it suffers from really bad things like mod PHP. But one of the things that Nginx does very well is work in a low memory environment, and that's something that Apache was never really designed for. Apache scales tremendously well when you can have 100 worker processes, but every worker process, particularly if you're using PHP, could be 50 megabytes. 100 times 50, you don't have that kind of memory. Right, so if you're running on a VPS, you need to be very, very memory conscious, and Nginx is just a better solution for that. Nginx only runs it runs a master process, but all that does is make sure that the client process is running, and if that dies, it'll respawn. But other than that, it's a single process. It uses like 4 meg of resident memory, in part because it does very little. All it's doing is sending bytes out the pipe. Nginx, I don't recommend that you get Nginx out of a package. You can. They're all pretty old. And Nginx builds super clean. So this command line here that looks kind of scary is really not that scary, but that's the configure that I use to build Nginx. And one of the things that I do that if you're into really nice performance is I use Nginx's cache. So in addition to being a great web server, Nginx is also a good proxy, and it can be a caching proxy. So all that stuff that something like WP Super Cache does, well, I can just have Nginx do that, and Nginx can do it way, way faster. So what I do is, this is my configure for Nginx. Feel free to steal it. there's not much going on here. It's all fairly self-explanatory. A couple of things I'll highlight. I am building in IPv6. If you don't, you won't be able to respond to IPv6. I am building in SSL. I specifically build out the stuff I know I'm not going to use. Again, just being secure. There's no way the IMAP module should ever be loaded, but why compile it in if I don't have to? And it, saved me like 300K in the executable. So that gets Nginx built, and then in order to run Nginx, or in order for Nginx to do something like WordPress, you have to run PHP outside of it. And so, like on my server, Nginx is actually using like 4 meg of memory, and PHP uses 80 megabytes of memory or something like that. And it uses 16 megabytes per process, just to give you kind of a sense of it's pig. But whatever, it's the people's language, so I'm okay with it. But if you follow this apt get PHP installed along with the fast CGI, and then you'll actually be running Nginx and PHP as separate processes, and Nginx will be relaying its request to PHP as needed. Does that make sense? Okay. It's not that complicated, but it can be a real bear to get set up. So you just have to make sure you follow kind of the config. So here's my config. Part of what I do here is, first of all, there's a bunch of defaults that I put. I try not to edit the default config files from things like Nginx or even Apache. I just want to put everything in my own. So what I do is I just have a default, this pub2 defaults, and this is that set of defaults. This is where I turn things like gzip on. The real magic here are those fast CGI cache paths. So that's the like super cool stuff that tells Nginx to create a block of storage that will be used for caching. And essentially what you're doing is saying, there's the location you want it in. So it's going to actually use that directory. It's on the file system. It's not like Varnish where it's just putting it in the shared memory. It's actually just going to create something on the file system. So put it in serve www MediaWiki fast CGI cache. Levels 1 and 2 just tell it how to structure the cache files. It puts it in 2 levels of hash so that your file system inodes don't get kind of blown up. And then I declare a zone. So the zone for this is MediaWiki, or the zone is WordPress, and I give it a 10-minute 10-minute cache. Wait a second. No, sorry, 10 meg, not 10 minute. That's 10 meg. And then inactive 360M means after 360 minutes, purge it from cache. So if you configure Nginx like this, one of the things that it will do is actually now you'll have 3 processes. You'll have the master process, you'll have the worker process that's managing incoming requests, and then you'll have a cache manager process as well. And the cache manager is what's keeping track of things like the inactive and the purging after 60 minutes. And then you set your cache key, which is essentially just says that the key for storing a unique value is going to be HTTP get hostname and then the URI. And what I'm not including there are things like cookies and stuff like that. So that way you get a good nice cache hit ratio for something like WordPress. Then to activate that, I run actually a few WordPress sites, and I also run like 13 MediaWiki sites, including the MinneBar wiki. And so I don't want to have multiple configurations for all that. So what you do is create an instance of the website. So here is this is actually the one for my personal blog. And you can tell that there's actually not a logic here, right? All I'm doing is saying that there's a server called Thingelstad.com, and its configuration is that Nginx WordPress. And the reason why I do that is because I don't want to replicate all the WordPress logic. I then take this file, is then this file, which is my global WordPress config. And this is where I actually create the WordPress Nginx config for an instance of WordPress. You'll see that it's got some interesting kind of stuff in here, like I put in the host token, so the logs will actually have a different log file for every host. That way I get nice clean logs. I put in, like, here's an actual brilliant thing that Nginx does. It's got this directive called try files, which is pretty damn cool, actually. What try files allows you to do is it establishes like a chained hierarchy. So it'll say, when you get a request that exactly matches robots.txt, try robots-host.txt. So the first thing I'll try is a host-specific robots. Secondarily, it'll try /robots.txt. Thirdly, if neither of those are hit, it'll respond with an equals 404, which means send a 404 error. So this is way, way faster than doing if conditionals, because you could say like if -f this file, then do this, else this, blah, blah, blah. Try files is, orders of magnitude faster and much, much more readable for maintenance-wise. The other thing that you do is use try files. One of the things that a lot of like WordPress configs do that is pretty poor is they route static files through PHP. Folks know about this, that like if you tell PHP to load a .gif, it actually loads it and serves it. It's like, why do you do that? It's terrible. It should just not work. So what you can do is use the same try file. So you do a try files on the URI with a slash, and then PHP. So if it's a JPEG, Nginx is going to intercept it, grab it, serve it. It'll only go to PHP if the file doesn't exist, which then drops it into the next batch. And this is where we get our magical caching. So we tell Nginx, like, yep, there's some stuff. By the way, if it's in the uploads directory, this is something that a lot of people don't do. But if your PHP is ever in the uploads, you should bail. You don't want to respond to that because you don't know how a PHP file should not be in that directory. So what this says is, as long as the URL does not contain uploads, send it to the FastGI processor. I'm going to give it 30 seconds to respond. And the other stuff is just kind of CGI stuff. The cache is the cool part. So it's going to say, put the response in that cache. That's that 10 megabyte bucket that we created. Only 200 requests are valid, or 200 requests are valid for an hour. 301 requests are valid for a day. And we only require a single hit before we put in the cache. I could say, don't cache until I get 5 requests or something like that. Now, the part that you're probably wondering about is, well, what happens when you write a new blog post, Jamie? Where's your confidence then? Well, what happens is there's actually a module that I highly recommend for Nginx called Cache Purge, which allows you to actually selectively purge from cache. It's not built into Nginx, but as a third-party module that you build in at compile time. And there's a WordPress plugin, yay, that actually will trigger cache purge when you write new posts. And by tying that, I tie that together right here. Where is it? Right here. This block says that if you receive a URL with purge, it can only come from the local host. Don't allow anybody else to send you that request. And when you get that, execute a purge on the URL that you were given. Now, if you do that, people are looking at me like, damn, that looks really complicated. But if you do that, I've actually used like tools like BrowserMob to send traffic to the server. I could serve 500, 600 concurrent users pounding away. Nginx is sitting there at like 5% CPU utilization. The box is like asleep, doesn't care. So the point is, like, you don't have to worry about being splash dotted or fireballed or anything like that. It's fast as hell. I'm going to skip the other stuff here. I have on here kind of, this is like how you configure WordPress for a multi-site without using WPMU, because I don't like WPMU. But you can figure out how to do all that stuff here. And like I said, the URL's right there. So if you want to go here and figure out how to install this stuff, it's pretty self-explanatory. A few of my friends have followed it and have gotten it working, so I know the directions are at least contiguous for some folks. So, any questions about any of this stuff? Jeff? Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I spent 3 weeks trying to get Chef to do anything. And I pay people that know how to make Chef do really cool stuff, and I couldn't figure it out at all. So, yeah, I've heard puppets a lot. Yeah, that's what I've heard. I actually think it is a brilliant idea because the reality is, right, when what's the new LTS 1204, right? It's coming this month. But then you got to redo all this. So it'd be great to use like Puppet or Chef. Yeah. We can never get back. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the tools he's talking about are automated DevOps tools like Chef or Puppet. We use them at our office. If you're in the cloud, you're crazy if you don't use them. And it'd be great to use them for stuff like this. It'd be nice. If I had Puppet, I could just say, well, go here and run this. So, yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for
I just Google it. I don't know very well that part of the world. I know that, doesn't that stuff run on Nginx these days? Or Passenger's its own thing, right? Yeah. I'm not sure. There's an Nginx Passenger? Yeah. In general, most of this stuff is kind of the idea of you're downloading PHP and you want to run it. So, and it is. I can tell you with this config, I've got Pingdom monitoring all these guys. My WordPress with that cache will respond in about 280 milliseconds on average throughout the course of the month. MediaWiki with no cache responds in about 580 milliseconds. So, which for me, as long as it's under a second, that's happiness. Yep. I don't know. So, yes, one of the things I did that you actually... What the hell? Wow, I think that was me. The access log line, so I don't have it set up this way, but you'll note I'm actually declaring a different access log for the purge method. That way I can actually see when purges are occurring. You could, I believe, declare a separate access log for cached hits and get stats on those. Yeah? Yeah, the WordPress plugin actually catches that. So, and it knows when a user comment happens, it purges the post and it purges the main page, but only if the post is on the main page. It's actually smart. Hack your own. Yeah. Or look for, the one thing I would say is that the Nginx cache can be purged very much like a Squid cache would be. And Squid's been around forever, so if you're using a Drupal or something that has like a Squid cache purging system, you can probably make Nginx work on it too. There. Oh, great. I do rely on Logwatch. I use Pingdom, which I think is a little expensive, but it's nice. I like that they give you round trip time. If you don't want to pay for Pingdom, site uptime is kind of a poor man's option. Site uptime will give you false positives. About every third month, you'll get a false positive. And then the other thing I use is Munin. I actually run Munin locally on the box to get all my graphs and see memory usage and all that stuff. Munin's super easy to install. It's on this web page as well. But it's useful for knowing what's going on. And yes?
First set up WordPress a while ago, there was issues with permalinks and Nginx. Is that still the case?
Hi. It's really annoying. Let's turn this off. There. WordPress. Actually, not a microphone. WordPress and permalinks. It's not an issue now,
Okay.
but you really do have to be careful. If you Google, you're going to find all sorts of garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because what you really want is you just want this. You'll see a lot of stuff, particularly for export try files, where they're doing a lot of like lobbing on the URL and trying to determine stuff. You don't want to do any of that. Just all you want to do is say either serve it or give it to PHP. That's it. And so that will get you there. And the same is actually true for MediaWiki. So MediaWiki's URL thing is a little bit more wacky, but it is ultimately the same kind of thing. And I use this actually with 3 or 4 different permalink structures, and it was fun. So yeah, totally fun. Out of time for one more question, or we're done?
What about Snort?
Oh, yeah, no, that's my tinfoil hat's not that big.
Okay.
I actually did. I set up. So at one point I had a red, green, blue network set home, and I teed off my Comcast connection and sent it to a Snort listener. And hey, there's all sorts of interesting. It's like a sitcom watching all that stuff happen. But I mean, the reality of IP tables is killing all that stuff, and so I think it's fine. But yeah. Although I'm a little hesitant to ever get in front of a room of geeks and say like, oh, my server's super secure.